We are privileged to have with us Richard Bouldry, accompanying our cantor, Cantor Dan Gale, who will offer musical selections for this night of Kristallnacht.
Tremlen fehl auf die Zweigen, schlaf mein teuer Kind. Bei dein Wiegel, auf dein Nahe, sitzt der Fremde und singt. Bei dein Wiegel, auf dein Nahe, sitzt der Fremde und singt. Juliu, Juliu, Juliu. Ist dein Fiegel vorgestanden, ausgeflochten von Glück. Und dein Mame, hoi, dein Mame, kommt schon kein Mal nicht zurück. Und dein Mame, hoi, dein Mame, kommt schon kein Mal nicht zurück. Juliu, Juliu, Juliu. Hab gesehen dein Taten laufen unter Hodel von Stein. Über Felder ist geflogen sein verjäusender Geweih. Über Felder ist geflogen sein verjäusender Geweih. Juliu, Juliu, Juliu. Wenn ich nehm der Monen sich, wenn ich wie na Kind gewähn, in der Heim, in Städtele Amol, in die schöne Winternacht pflegen mir spazieren gehen und cholmen chaloimes ohne Zoll. Hoi wie dem Mond ist gewesen, so herzig, so schön. Wenn wir pflegen, gehen vorbei die Schule und im Chasen die schöne Stimme hat geklingen, so frimm. Bei dem Omd mit Greus gefiel. Gewachert rohe jeder Roi. Zoi noi tachas shivtoi, ma vir zoi noi tachas shivtoi, tachas shivtoi. Vakarais royen roi, ma vir zoi no tachas shivtoi. Ma vir zoi noi tachas shivtoi, ma vir zoi noi tachas shivtoi. Tachas Also bänke nicht von Frier, geblieben ist im Herz bei mir. Was ist geworden von mein Städtele? Was ist geworden von mein alter Heim? Oi, wie es bringt sich noch mein Städtele, mein Jugend hab ich noch verbracht in dem. Das Kessele, das Schulichel, wie herzig und wie schön. Das Bäumele, das Milchel, will ich es wenn noch sehen. Was ist geworden von mein Städtele? Was ist geworden von der alten
Thank you, Cantor Gale and Richard Baldry. Beautiful, poignant, powerful pieces. We light candles. We light 6 candles for 6 million. What do the candles represent? Of course, they represent sorrowful remembrance, and yet they represent more than that as well. They also represent a beacon of light amidst prevailing darkness. They represent justice against injustice. And of course, they represent the enduring Jewish hope, the enduring Jewish prayer, in fact, for a better future for all humanity, for a thriving future for the Jewish people. Each of the following individuals or couples, candlelighters, each one has been touched in some way by the Shoah, as we will soon hear. And each one is devoted to, yoked to, committed to building a grand future as well for us, the Jewish people. 6 candles for 6 million. The first candle will be lit by Evie and Rabbi Ralph Rubner. Evie's father, Herbert Prower, was arrested on November 10th, 1938, in his hometown of Landeshut, Cilicia. He arrived at the synagogue, their synagogue, at 5:30 in the morning. It was in flames. The fire department watched it burn. Herbert Prower was the treasurer of that synagogue. With dozens of other adult Jewish males, he and his uncle were taken to Sachsenhausen, where he and the other prisoners were brutalized. His brother had been arrested in Berlin and joined them there. Due to age, his uncle was released after a few days. Herbert and his brother were released after a couple of weeks, after they agreed to the forced sale of the family shoe factory and other real estate. Herbert and his wife Charlotte and his mother, they left Germany and they arrived in New York City exactly 1 year later, November 1939. They then settled in Chicago. Herbert Prower became president of Congregation Ezra. Rabbi Ralph and Evie. Judge Joel Chupak. The Holocaust gave Joel's mother, Linda Chupak, 4 distinct lives. She was born Leah Vigodna, the youngest of 5 children of Yitzhak and Nacha. She was too young to attend the burial of her mother, who died from typhoid fever after the war began, but she was not too young to assume the identity of a Polish child, Tasha Wolna, who had been taken, that Polish girl had been taken along with other Polish teens to Germany as forced laborers. After the war, Joel's mother resumed the use of her birth name, but she was not the same person. No longer a child, she had witnessed too much horror. Her parents and closest brother were gone. She later immigrated to America under the name Linda Vigodna. She finally settled here in Chicago, married Joel's father, and created a big, loving family, 4 children in 6 years. Linda Chupak never forgot her past, but always looked forward. She knew the narrow bridge upon which we Jews walk. Joel Chupak. Sophie and Michael Barron. Sophie Barron's mother, Frida, died just a few months ago. Frida was born in 1924 in Lithuania. Frida and her sister Luba, she had a bigger family, but Frida and her sister Luba escaped a liquidation and spent formative teenage years in harrowing flights. They were taken in by a Russian Orthodox family, and then they had to leave that situation. They ended up in the Lithuanian cold winter and nearly perished. Later, Frida became sick with typhus. She healed miraculously. She lived for a while in the Kovno ghetto. Heroically, truly heroically, Frida smuggled children out of the ghetto, hiding them in sacks and in luggage, and eventually getting them to safe houses. In the ghetto, Frida learned of a pending liquidation, and she escaped into the forests and joined partisans. She was shot in the finger. Frida was aided by a young Lithuanian during the time, Stasha, whom Frida helped later to attain righteous Gentile status. Frida lost much of her family in the Holocaust. She ended up thriving. Her family, including Sophie and Michael, emigrated from the Soviet Union to America on Thanksgiving in 1980, 40 years ago. Sophie and Michael. Dr. Fred Huss. Fred's parents, David and Brenda, came from Horodęka in Poland, in southeastern Galicia. In 1941, Germany invaded and occupied that town of Horodęka. Just before the Nazis arrived, David Huss, Fred's father, and his family, father, mother, brothers, sisters, escaped by foot, wagon, and train into the Soviet Union. They posed as Ukrainian and Polish nationals in Stavropol. David Huss's mother and his sisters were murdered there. Meanwhile, Brenda Huss, David's future wife, lived in a ghetto in Horodęka with her brothers and sister. After surviving the actions, they took refuge in a cave on the outskirts of town. They were there for nearly 2 years during Brenda's teenage years until the remainder of the war. Brenda's sister and brother died in that cave. David and Brenda Huss returned to Horodęka after liberation. They married. They ended up in Germany in a displaced persons camp. Fred Huss was born in Darmstadt in 1948. And the next year, the family came to America and settled in Skokie. Brenda taught at Hillel Torah Day School, and David Huss was Dave the Barber. Fred Huss. Okay. Light it now, Fred, so we can highlight you. Evie Lowenthal. Evie Lowenthal's father was Norbert Sender. He was arrested at around this time in 1938 in his town in southwestern Germany and sent to Dachau. His wife, Evie's mother, was a strong, plucky, ingenious, brave woman. She petitioned vigorously for her husband's release. Norbert was released from Dachau after several months, but he had been grievously beaten and he suffered very serious brain injuries. Betty and Norbert ended up in Italy. An Italian doctor refused to care for Norbert, but Betty, his wife, showing her usual bravery, convinced the doctor to instruct her on how to do what she needed to do to try to heal her husband. They ended up finding passage by boat from Italy to the United States, and they settled in Kansas City. Evie's late husband, Henry, was born Henry Lebenthal in Darmstadt, Germany. His father was a cantor. That family escaped from Germany in 1937, 1938. Evie Lowenthal. The sixth candle, Betsy Weil. As an American Jew, and especially as a college student, Betsy Weil knows how it feels for her Jewish identity to be both accepted and dismissed. Betsy speaks up against injustices, not only injustices against her own people and community, but injustices as well against communities of her friends and neighbors as well. Though Betsy is a child of America, she believes that Israel too is her home, and she has spent much time there. Betsy feels fortunate to advocate for her homeland, for our homeland, every day, so that the Jewish people will continue to prosper. Betsy Weil lights a candle this evening for those who perished in the Shoah. And as well, she lights a candle as a symbol of hope for future generations of the Jewish people. Am Yisrael Chai. Betsy Weil. Thank you all. Our candlelighters, thank you. We now turn to the next part of our program, this Kristallnacht program. Before we do so, though, I'd like to thank the committee that helped to conceive of this program and works hard on this and cares so much about this program and so many other things as well. Rosalind Jaffe and Rabbi Ralph Rubner, thank you so much. And of course to Lee Levin and to Elena as well, helping with technology as usual, thank you so much. Cantor Gale and Richard Bouldry, thank you as well. And now, it is really my great pleasure to introduce Professor Kathy Lesser Mansfield. It has been very enjoyable communicating with Professor Mansfield, conceiving of this program and talking about her talk, which she will share presently. Kathy Lesser Mansfield is the Senior Instructor in Law and Executive Director of the Masters of Arts in Financial Integrity Program, Financial Integrity Institute at the School of Law at Case Western. Professor Kathy Lesser Mansfield joined the Case Western Reserve Law School faculty in July 2019 as Executive Director of the Master of Arts in Financial Integrity Program and Senior Instructor in Law. Prior to joining Case Western Reserve University faculty. She was a professor of law at Drake University Law School, and she served as policy analyst with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And she was a visiting professor of law at Georgetown Law School. Professor Mansfield teaches a variety of consumer, payments, and commercial law courses. She is co-author of the National Consumer Law Center's Consumer Banking and Payments Law Manual. She speaks nationally about consumer protection issues. Professor Mansfield also teaches a course called Holocaust and the Law. She is a distinguished fellow at the Consortium for the Research and Study of Holocausts and the Law at Chicago-Kent College of Law, the Center for National Security and Human Rights Law right here in Chicago. She is also, most interestingly, maybe not most interestingly, very, very interestingly, the composer and librettist of an opera entitled The Sparks Fly Upward. That opera follows 3 German families in Berlin, 2 Jewish families and 1 Christian family. It follows them through the Holocaust. And the professor is also the founder and executive director of the Sparks Fly Upward Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating people about the Holocaust, genocide, and tolerance through presentations of sparks and ancillary activities. And so, Professor Kathy Lesser-Mansfield, it is really a great pleasure and honor to have you speaking to us, albeit remotely, on this Kristallnacht. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me join you for your lovely service. You have a beautiful synagogue, and I hope someday we can all visit with each other in person when this horrible pandemic is over. I just thought I'd give you a little bit of an outline of what I'm planning to do with my time, and then I'm going to be using a PowerPoint. So I thought in the first 5 minutes or so, I'd just explain how I got interested in studying the Holocaust and Kristallnacht in particular, and the events leading up to Kristallnacht. And then I'm going to take us through a slide presentation that is mostly photographs of the events of the time. And then since there's actually a quote in my opera from the events leading up to Kristallnacht, of course, there's a siren outside my apartment. I'm going to go ahead and show you just a few minutes of the opera. So let me start by just telling you that I'm Jewish, but my family escaped from Europe between World War I and World War II. So I do not have a direct lineage connection to the Holocaust, but like all Jewish families, we lost many branches of our family in the Holocaust. And Rabbi, if you can hear me okay, or would someone are we good? It sounds good and everything. Everyone can hear me. And okay.
Yes, you're good. Thank
Awesome.
you, Professor Mansfield. We hear you.
Thank you. So I had written some music in high school using the Book of Job as the sort of source material. And when I became older, I decided to try and merge it with a story about the Holocaust. And so I started doing historical research. And it literally took me another 30 years to complete the opera. But in the course of researching the opera, I took research trips to Germany. I was a fellow at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and learned quite a lot about the history of the Holocaust, and then later combined it with my legal stuff to do the law in the Holocaust class. What I'm going to share with you tonight is part of basically the story of the 10 days or so just before Kristallnacht. So first of all, it's worth just looking at a map of what Europe, the borders between Poland and Germany looked like at the time. So this is a map from 1933, and in particular, you can see that Berlin and Dresden, Germany is this over here, and then the border with Poland and Germany is here. And in particular, we're going to be talking a lot about Żebazin, Poland, which was literally just across the border from Germany. And the events that kicked off or were the pretext for Kristallnacht. And it's very important to say that because these events did not lead to Kristallnacht. They just became the pretext for Kristallnacht. Was this event that happened on October 6th. The Polish government on October 6th, 1938, issued a decree that said that if you had a Polish passport and you lived outside of Poland, you had to return to Poland by October 30th to get your passport revalidated, or you would lose your ability to come back to Poland. And at the time, there were about 17 or 18,000 Polish Jews living in Germany who had Polish citizenship and Polish passports. There were also a whole bunch of other people who weren't Jewish who lived in Germany who had Polish passports. But the events that happened ended up actually affecting just the Jews who lived in Germany. So what basically happened was on early in the morning of October 28th, 1938, 2 days before this restriction on coming back to Poland took place, Germany decided that it didn't want to have 18,000 stateless Jews in its borders. And so it deported, it tried to deport all 18,000 Jews, although going back to the map, what ended up happening was most of the Jews who ended up in Poland were from this eastern part of Germany because there was an international outcry, and so some of the deportations stopped. Now, it's important to remember this is 1938 when this was happening, and just as a frame of reference, Hitler had become Chancellor of Germany in 1933. So this is now 5 years into the regime. This is after the Nuremberg laws. It's after a lot of the anti-Jewish legislation, but it's before World War II started on September 1st, 1939. And it's also before the first deportations of Jews en masse started, which was really about 1941. So anyway, so October 28th, 1938, this is an incredibly civilized set of photographs. And I've actually discussed this with other historians that they're labeled as being from Nuremberg on October 28th, 1938, but these people look very well dressed and very well prepared. At least in Berlin, they literally broke into people's homes at 5:30 in the morning and took people in their pajamas, didn't give them time to pack anything, no suitcase, no money, no clothing, no nothing. And in some cases, they took just the men in the family. In some cases, they took everyone. And they basically put them on trains, sometimes on passenger cars, sometimes on what we're more used to seeing, the sort of cattle cars. And they sent them to the Polish border. And it was very well covered in the international press. So this is the New York Times. This is page 1 of the New York Times on October 29th, 1938. And there were similar articles in the London newspapers and internationally. This is a modern day map of Europe, but I thought I would just identify some of the places where the Jews were dropped. So they were literally just taken to the border and forced across the border. And you ended up with refugee camps in various places along the border. But the one I'm going to focus on is Zhebazhin because I have photographs from there. Once they got to the border, it was very brutal. There were people just being kicked off the trains and being sent across the border. And this is a quote from someone that the New York Times reporter interviewed who had just been sent across the border. We were warned not to look back, but we heard the rattling of machine guns in the rear. The SS men threatened to shoot if anyone tried to stay behind, so we moved forwards for quite a while in dead silence. We were hungry and tired, and some elderly people collapsed under the bundles they were carrying. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, rifle shots broke the silence. The people ran or dropped to the ground, and where they were beaten and trod on by guards. Many were injured during the stampede. I lost my baggage, as did many others. There was no time to recover it. And this next photo is actually the train yard in Zhebazhin. And you can see that to the extent people were able to carry luggage, it ended up being much of it left behind at the rail depot in Zhebajan. I should also mention that since my research involved Berlin, I know the most about what happened in Berlin. And on that morning, they took all of the mostly men who had been arrested to a train station that's no longer there. It's called the Schlesischer train station. But they actually didn't depart on trains for the rest of the day. They didn't depart till the evening. And so a lot of the reports of that train station were that the women, the wives of the men who'd been arrested, were coming during the day with suitcases, with food, with provisions for the men who were about to be, they thought, taken east, but they didn't know for sure. When everybody got to Zhebajan, you can see in these next few photos, it was quite disorganized, hectic. You can see there are men with guns trained on everybody. And in these early pictures, in the first couple days, you can see that people were there were just masses of people, very disorganized, and, really no place to sit, no place to eat. People are, they're squished into these buildings. There was a flour factory that was owned by a Jew, and he let people into the flour factory. There was a military stable that was there, and people were allowed into the stables. So this is October 29th. This is the second day, and people were still arriving on that day. But it didn't take long before there was an international outcry, and Germany actually, there was a Polish outcry as well, and Germany stopped shipping additional people to the border, and they also turned some trains around that were on their way to the border. So that people that ended up stuck in Poland were largely people from Eastern Berlin, because from Western Berlin, it was a slower trip. But about 7,000 ended up in Poland, and about 10,000 of those that were arrested ended up back home. And then I chose this quote because it speaks to how quickly the Polish Jewish community actually gathered itself to take care of these Jews who had been dumped from Germany. We were pushed over the Polish border and arrived on a Sunday at the main depot in Katowice. The reception given to us by the Jews in Poland who had been informed about us was so warm and marvelous that for a moment one was able to forget the pain, the misery, and the want. The people sacrificed everything day and night. They provided us with food, nourishment, clothing, and everything possible. Don't forget that we were not permitted to take a thing with us. And I don't know, that really spoke to my heart about how we take care of each other. And in fact, it didn't take long. You can see this is November 3rd. There's people are organized into groups. You can start seeing some people are sitting. There are, it's just starting to be a little more organized. And it's really quite remarkable that very quickly, the Jewish community in Poland provided cots and provided food. And then they organized the people who had been deported into groups who would cook, and they, were divided into work groups and that sort of thing. So here you see people getting soup fed to them, and these are women peeling potatoes. Also another soup line. And the Red Cross came in, and people were allowed to send postcards via the Red Cross to people that had been left behind in Germany. And this is the flour factory in Zhebajan where people were allowed to stay. Eventually, the people who were stuck in Poland were integrated into some of the Polish communities like Lodz and Warsaw. But there were families who were separated as a result of this and never made it back together, because either some of the family was taken or family members were taken and were sent to different places in Poland. So this is all October 28th, 29th, the early part of November. One of the families that was deported was the Greenspan family. And that family had a son named Herschel Greenspun who was living in Paris, and Herschel's sister, Berta Greenspun, wrote a letter to him, and the part of my opera I'm going to show you is the actual text of the letter. And she wrote this letter to her brother saying, look, basically, we've all been deported to Poland. We have nothing. We have no money. You know, can you send us some money? And he became extremely distraught. And he went to the Reich embassy in Paris, where he was living, and he shot. There are so many stories about what exactly happened here, but the official line is he shot the third ranked person in the embassy because that was the first person that he saw when he came into the embassy. So the man that he shot was named Ernst vom Rath. You can see his name right here. And Ernst vom Rath lived he was shot on the 7th, and he lived until the morning of the 9th, and he died on the morning of the 9th. This is Herschel Greenspun. These are all photos of Herschel Greenspun in Paris. This is him being brought into the commissary, the police department. This is him. This is him here. This is him here. There have been a couple books written about just this assassination and just these events. This is sort of a side note, but we don't really know what happened to Herschel Greenspun. He, according to the most recent book about him, he claimed that he was actually gay and was involved in a relationship with Ernst von Rath. But the author of this book believes that his lawyer advised him to say that because they knew the Germans would never put Herschel on trial if it sullied the reputation of a German officer. And of course, in addition to being anti-Jewish, the Nazis were anti-gay. So some people believe that that Herschel was killed during World War II. Some people think that he survived. I don't know that we'll ever know, but he was never put on public trial when the Nazis invaded France and northern France became occupied France in 1940. He was turned over to the custody of the Germans, and that's where we kind of lose track of him. Regardless, Ernst vom Rath died, and it became the pretext for what became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, or the November 9th pogrom. And this was a poster sort of inciting people to violence. The official line on the evening was from propaganda minister Goebbels, who said the Fuhrer has decided the demonstrations should not be prepared or organized by the party, but insofar as they erupt spontaneously, they are not to be hampered. You have to remember November 9th is the anniversary of Hitler's attempt to take over the government in 1923. And so the party was actually doing some, big hoo-ha down in Nuremberg, and this was what they released. Of course, we now know that Kristallnacht was just erupted everywhere. And so this is a map from the Holocaust Museum in Washington of all the places that were impacted. And so what I have now is just a series of photographs of damage from that evening. So the first set is just Jewish businesses. So Jews actually started department stores. I don't know if y'all know that, but we're the ones who came up with department stores, and there were a lot of them in Berlin at the time. And so some of these pictures are from those department stores. The Grunfeld department store was a big one. This is a before picture and then after. This is a very famous picture. It's in a lot of Holocaust museums. Always troubled by the people that are smiling outside the damage. This is a very large department store in Berlin, and this is what the interior of the department store looked like on November 10th. And then, of course, there were many, many synagogues that were burned and damaged and destroyed. And this is actually I have some before and after pictures. This is the Fassenstrasse Synagogue in Berlin. Berlin had everything from the most enormous, glorious synagogues with organs and, huge bimas and just, holding thousands of people, to little shoals all over the place. So this was one of the bigger ones. And this is what it looked like on Kristallnacht. And that's what it looked like after Kristallnacht. This is the inside of that synagogue. Beautiful, beautiful interior. And sadly, this is what it looked like after Kristallnacht. I think kind of like Notre Dame Cathedral, which burned last year, I think the buildings were made of stone, but the roofs were made of wood. And so you can see there's been a lot of damage. This is another large synagogue in Berlin, the Prinzregentenstrasse synagogue. And of course, this happened all over Germany, all over Austria. This is in Siegen. This is another very famous photograph. This is in Frankfurt am Main. And then even little synagogues like this one were also set ablaze. And you might be interested to know, whoops, I'm sorry. The people with the hoses, in a lot of cases, the fire department responded in order to keep the flames from spreading to the next door neighbor. So they would spray water on the building that was next to the synagogue in order to keep that building from burning. And then this is in Bielefeld, and I actually owe a debt of gratitude to the to the archive here. They gave me these photographs to use in the opera, and the only payment they wanted was a recording of the opera. And they were just so apologetic that this had happened in their city. And then this is a link, whoops, this next one is a link to some video footage. So I have to share a different screen, so give me just a second. Can you all see that film? I hope.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And these are the damaged sidors. And then, of course, there was graffiti. This photograph. There was a photographer named Abraham Pasarik who went out. He was a Jew. He went out the morning after Kristallnacht and took all these photographs, which I think was incredibly brave. And then, of course, Jewish men were arrested. Some of the people who spoke, who lit the candles, had relatives who were arrested that night. They were marched in through town and then taken to the first big concentration camps: Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen, Dachau. And then, of course,
in 1938,
I'm sorry.
on the 9th of November, all of a sudden, we had no idea. We smelled the burning. And later, when we lived a little away from the synagogue, they destroyed the synagogue. They burned it down, and they had to bring in a certain amount of Jews. They had a quota. Every town, the Nazis did everything gedas and gedin. They had a quota. They had to bring in so many Jews from Fulda. And some of the Jews had somebody tell them that there was going to be trouble. And
Yes.
They ran into the woods, including the rabbi.
Where were you?
I was 16 years at the time. All of a sudden, the Nazis came and they ransacked the apartment. They threw everything down, the silver, the gold, and everything that was in the apartment, out the window. And on the bottom on the street, we were on the first floor, one flight up. And downstairs, on the street, were the Goyish women standing with their, what do you call it, the aprons, the big aprons there, and catching the silver and gold that was thrown out the window. The same women that put on the lights and burnt, the same women were downstairs on the street catching it.
Sir, we're going to continue with the program.
People
Sir.
that we were friendly with.
We appreciate the comment.
People
We
that
will
we
continue
knew
with
for
Professor
20,
Mansfield's
30
comments
years.
for presentation. Okay, sir?
Can you
We'll
imagine
continue.
how
Thank
we
you.
felt?
I can't
Nobody
imagine.
helped.
Helped?
Can't imagine.
No one.
We had a Catholic home across the street from our business. When we knocked on the door on that 9th of November, they refused to open for us.
We will continue now with
We're always
Professor
friendly
Mansfield's presentation.
We will not help you. We cannot help you. We won't do anything for you.
Yeah, I know. And,
After they had thrown out all the belongings that were worthwhile, others came and looked for me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue with the
I was
professors.
taken in.
Sir, let's continue with the professors. Talk, please. Please close your mic. We'll let the
September
professor
comes the very
continue.
hard part. I was taken in
He's not
and was marched
Nope.
to an assembly point where about 70 Jewish men were assembled. And on the way, there's people on both sides, Goyim, spat in my face, cursed and called all kinds of names. When we came to this assembly point, we were marched off into a train. Of Hanau, which is closer to my grandfather's where he lived. There was the assembly, that was the big plan where the whole train was going to.
Kathy, you'll need to unmute yourself. Kathy, unmute yourself.
Okay, that is the biggest electronic mistake I've made in my entire teaching career. Do you all know what that was? That was YouTube going on to the next video automatically. And I thought it was one of you, and so I
Oh,
didn't
she
want to
did it.
interrupt. So I am deeply sorry that I took us down that road. I'm very sorry.
It was interesting.
It was interesting, but I thought it was one of you, and I didn't want to interrupt. So
No,
I'm actually
she's
pretty
got
much at the end.
I think you're fine.
The last thing I was just going to show you is sorry, I'm all like blah now. Okay, we'll do slideshow from current slide.
So it was her.
It was me. I apologize. Yes. That's why when you muted everybody, it didn't work. So anyway, so this is an immigration office right after Kristallnacht. And some people were still able to get out, but not a lot. And I just wanted to finish with a couple pictures from after the war, because I know we talk about hope at the end of all this, and it's an important thing. These are two of my favorite pictures from the Holocaust Museum's archives. This was two gentlemen who were very good friends and didn't know the other one had survived the war, and ran into each other when they came back. And this is the first Jewish baby born in a displaced persons camp after the war. And this is a trove of Torah scrolls that were hidden in a church. And then this is the rededication of the new synagogue, or the Neue Synagogue in Berlin. Okay, so if time permits, I would like to share the Berta Greenspahn letter. And Rabbi, I'll leave it up to you whether we have time for that or not, since I let YouTube carry
Yes.
on.
Yeah, yes, we do. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Not at all. Thank you.
You wouldn't know that I do this for a living. Okay, here goes. We'll see if I can make this work. So just to cue this up, the opera starts on October 28th, 1938, with the arrest of the Jewish men in Berlin. And it's one apartment building, one Jewish man who's being arrested. And at this point in the opera, they've all been deported. There's been a scene in the synagogue, and I'm going to show you the end of the scene in the synagogue. The woman on the far right is the one whose husband has been taken. And then the next scene is Herschel Greenspahn and his sister. And the words are the exact words from Berta Greenspan's letter to Herschel Greenspahn from Jabazin, which we just saw, to her brother in Paris. And I'm hoping I can get this to work. I don't think I'm going to be able to get it to work. I did try it, and it was working okay.
That's okay. Lee, am I on? It's something for us to look forward to. It's a foretaste, something for us to look forward to for a future program.
Yeah, well, and I will tell you that we were supposed to be doing the opera simulcast all over the world next weekend, but of course, that's not happening. But we have the theater reserved for next Kristallnacht, so hopefully, yeah.
Okay, well, we can look forward to that for sure. It's
Yeah,
okay.
and I'm sorry, as soon as I'm looking at it, and until I share my screen, I don't understand why it won't let me share the whole board. So apologies.
In any event, much thanks.
Thank you.
So this
Thank you
was-
for all you've shared with us.
It's really,
It's my
truly,
pleasure.
I hear people are
was very interesting.
are unmuting themselves now. Okay, but I'd just like to say this is so informative and insightful and meaningful and powerful. So Professor Kathy Lesser-Mansfield, we thank you so, so much. And really, it is just a foretaste of other opportunities for us to learn from you. And I hope that we do get to do that.
I hope
Versprecher.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, and sorry about all the technical glitches.
Not at all. They pale in comparison to the success of the program which you've taught us. So thank you very, very much. They really
That's
do.
good judgment, good judgment.
Thank you. Okay, friends.
Toda
Next.
Rabba.
Great. Toda Rabba. So we're
Okay.
not quite finished, friends.
Toda
So
Rabba.
don't go anywhere, but please mute yourselves. Thank you. We continue with the conclusion of our time together this evening. As we do that, just remember that Ezra Habonim, the Niles Township Jewish congregation, is one of the very few synagogues that has, by its charter, its constitution, an obligation to honor Kristallnacht, to commemorate Kristallnacht every year, and we do that. So, and we will continue to do it as well, just as we honor Yom HaShoah. Remember that day as well. So I'm grateful again to our leadership, which makes this possible, to Rosalind Jaffe and Ralph Rubner. Once again, thank you so much. And I'll just thank Professor Kathy Lesser-Mansfield again. It really was an honor to be with you this evening. Friends, the memorial prayer is El Malei Rachamim, which means God full of compassion. And Cantor Gail will present to us a special El Malei Rachamim. At this time, please rise.
Malei Rachamim, Shochen b'meromim, Hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים שמות אחינו בני ישראל הקדושים והטהורים שנפלו לבני הרוצחים ונשפכו דמם באושוויץ, מיידנק, טרבלינקה ובשאר מחנות השמם באירופה שנהרגו ונשרפו ונשגטו ונקברו חיים בכל מיתוס משונוס באכזוריות Oh Hashem Ba'obur Sh'anachnu V'neihem u'vnoteihem V'acheihem v'achoteihem Nodrim tzedako V'yada hazekot nishmoteihem Began Began Eden Tehem nochatam Lachen Ba'ol harachamim Yostireim Beseder Knofo Yitzror hachayim Yitzror hachayim Yitzror hachayim et nishmotam Yitzror hachayim Yitzror hachayim Yitzror hachayim et nishmotam Adonai hu nochlotam Yanuchu Yeshua Halom Al Mishkevotam V'nomar
Amen. We conclude with a Kaddish of remembrance. Yitgadal,
Kishinev,
Yitkadash,
Warsaw,
Shemei Rabbah,
Auschwitz,
Ba'amad Divrach Chirutei,
Dachau,
Yamlich Malchutei,
Buchenwald,
B'chaychon Uvyomechon,
Babi Yar,
Uvchay Dechol Beit Yisrael,
Baghdad,
Ba'agalah Bizman Kariv,
Hebron,
V'imru Amen,
Amen.
Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach, La'alam Ulamei Amaya. Yibarach V'yishtabach,
Kfar Etzion,
V'yit pa'ar, v'yit ramam,
Mayentz,
v'yit naseh, v'yit hadar,
Teretzin,
v'yit aleh, v'yit halal.
Treblinka,
Shmei Kudashah B'richu,
Bergen-Belsen,
Le'ela u'le'ela,
Vilna,
V'kol virchata v'shirata,
Usha,
Tushbechata, B'nechamata,
Masada,
Da'amiran Be'alma,
Jerusalem.
Be'imru,
Amen.
Amen. Yehi Shlam Rabba Min Shemaya, Be'chaim Aleinu Be'al Kol Yisrael, Be'imru, Amen.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom B'Ramav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu Be'al Kol Yisrael, Be'imru,
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Erev Tov. Shalom. Am Yisrael Chai.